Mate, come on into the man cave. We've got a lot to talk about tonight, including doom and gloom. Not from Jim Chalmers, this time from Chris Bowen. He will use this as the excuse to take the current pledge of dealing with 43% of 1% of the world's climate problem to maybe 55, 65, 75 or 100% of 1% of the world's climate problem. More on in a sec. The Prime Minister is in Papua New Guinea and a decision has been made over the weekend that I'm surprised you haven't heard more about. Details in a moment. And the polling problems for the Liberal Party, the opportunities, the pitfalls, and do they need a new song to sing? Because Samaras, he'll tell you the truth, whether some want to hear it or not, tonight on the show, because we're always just here to help. But before I get to the nonsense that was taking place today in and around Canberra and in and around matters to do with how Australia can apparently change the weather for the entire planet, immigration, a subject that matters to almost all Australians. Because the reality is our quality of life matters. The number of people here matching the number of infrastructure or the amount of infrastructure, the ability, when you call 000 for the ambulance to turn up, for the ambulance to actually result in you getting a hospital bed, for you being able to have a place for your kids to one day rent or own. This is why we talk about it. Now, of course, to discuss this in any way, shape or form, well, it's very easy for people to brush away, you know the word they like to use.
There were literally racist tropes being spread.
I mean, Trump's actions have already emboldened racist, ableist, homophobic filth everywhere.
Is that racism? Is that racism? Can I just call out racism in this chamber right now, please?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, yet another opinion poll, which again you probably didn't hear much about today, says that at least half of the country has a problem with the numbers of people, not the types, but the numbers of people that are coming into the country. Now, I love when the websites that run all day, every day, the narrative that any conversation about migration is somehow a dog whistle about racism, and then they actually get data to remind them of what the real world says. Well, here's the poll. Put simply, red is half of the country. That red is that immigration numbers are too high. The teal is the Goldilocks of about right, which is about a quarter of the electorate. 18% of people, that's the grey, they don't know what's going on because they're undecided. And 5% of people, I'd love to meet who these people are, but the 5% who say it's too low, is this the 5% who are the government, the 5% who are much of the media, the 5% that are much of the influencers who don't see any changes to their suburbs? Interestingly, the second question is the real headline, but they weren't that interested in talking about it inside the article. How's this? 55% of people, when asked, would you say the government is, or how do you think the government is handling immigration in an unplanned and unmanaged way? 55%. 49% say too high, and then 55%. So even the people who say that it's about right, or they're undecided, or it's too low, some of those people are added to that 49% to say that currently it is in an unplanned and unmanaged way. Now, this matters. It matters also that just 21% of people believe that migration has been managed. 25% of people remain undecided. You can also break this down by party. Can we have a look at that as well here? Where the teal blue are the people who think that even 41% of Labor voters think that it's currently unmanaged. 67% of coalition voters, 37% of Green voters, 68% of everything from teal to a One Nation voter, and even the undecideds, 49% of them believe that migration is currently not being managed well by the government. A little reminder that every time you ask the people have the same reaction. Now, I know that over the past few weeks, and the very reason why this poll was put into the field was because of recent marches. The hope was of those who did this poll that they would get a stunningly leftist answer. But the reality is that a majority of Australians know the government is not doing this the way they should be doing it, and half of the country says too many people are coming in. Now, again, I know there are some people who talk about this issue through the lens of culture. If you pay attention to what I have actually said, nothing else, I don't talk about that. Because the reality is that this is a country where I don't care from whence you come, from what you believe, all the rest of it, as long as you understand that when you get here, this is the best place ever. You have to leave a whole bunch of stuff behind, and there are plenty of examples of that failing in our society. But there's also the extreme majority of people who end up coming to the country who, of course, want to build a better life. There are people that have come from all parts of the world and, of course, welcome. Enjoy yourself. It's a great place. You've got the greatest club in the world, this one. But one of the reasons why Australians have the frustrations that we currently do is, as I said before, if already you are one of the people who lives about an hour away from where you've got to go to work, you've got to get up early, squint on most likely a tollway if you're in Sydney or Melbourne, obviously the tunnel if we're dealing in Brisbane, to then come home and squint into the sun before it disappears to spend, what, an hour with your kids each and every day, and that's it. People get frustrated with that. It is about infrastructure. It is about the capacity of our country to be able to have that extraordinary number of people in it. But also one of the reasons why the majority of people think that the country is not currently actually dealing with some of the complexities in and around migration. Well, we turn to the Daily Wire. The Daily Wire, my apologies. We turn now to, among others here, the Daily Mail. Got a bit of Ben Shapiro on the brain as I speak quickly. I apologise. Now, they quote from a report from the Australian National University, not a far right-wing think tank. And a recent study has found that migration plan has seen far fewer skilled migrants entering the country than initially intended. The ANU report reveals only 12%, write this one down, 12% of placements available in the migration program were being given to skilled workers from overseas. The report found the vast majority of the visas were given to the family members of the skilled workers. So yes, they've got a husband, they've got a wife, they've got a kid, they've got a mum, they've got a dad, they may well have a brother or they may well have a sister. Family and secondary applicants made up more than 60% of the permanent visas, which is double the amount officially claimed, the report has stated. They've even got quotes here. The director of the ANU Migration Hub, the ANU professor, and his co-author, another professor, argued that the program was broken and did not provide a steady pipeline of skilled workers. Because you see, that's what we're always told, isn't it? The reason why we have to have a big Australia is because as Australia gets bigger, we need more people who can swing a hammer. More people who have the skills that Australians do not have because, of course, almost every Australian kid goes on to tertiary education. They don't go to TAFE. They don't get an ABN. They don't serve an apprenticeship. This is part of the fundamental design flaw that means people will remain angry about immigration. Now, again, are there some people who, when they talk about this, they talk about it exclusively through the cultural lens? Fine, but that's not my bag. I've made it abundantly clear. But of course, those who want to just keep going on with the system as it currently is because it either changes the way that elections work, it changes the way the country works, or who knows? There's more people to sell to, or a government says there's more people to potentially get jobs, and that means more taxation, and more taxation means you can make more spending promises. There are plenty of people that are invested in that big Australia. Currently, 30 years ago, 18 million. Now, 27 million. Into the 2060s, 40 million people, which you would think would kind of matter if apparently we need to do everything we possibly can when it came to climate change. Meet me over here. As you know, today, Chris Bowen was handed a report of catastrophe. Now, of course, all of the catastrophic stuff that you have heard and read is all about whether there is a 1.5 to 3 degree warming of the planet. Now, of course, countries like Australia are doing all the best they can to try to cut back on greenhouse emissions because we're trying to stop 1.5. So many of these predictions that you read about or hear about or used as justification over the next few days, they are all predicated on every country doing duck egg nothing. But as if any of that asterisk turned up in any of the media coverage today. Behold, the media doing the government's fear-mongering for it.
A high-level snapshot of Australia's exposure to climate change has warned that millions of people will be at risk from rising sea levels and more will die from heat waves.
A dire new climate change report predicts heatwave deaths will soar in Western Sydney, farming will be less profitable and government budgets will be drained.
Australians stare down the barrel of doomsday climate prediction.
Scientists have long warned apocalyptic scenes like these in Black Summer 5 years ago will be more frequent.
And if that wasn't enough, here is the Minister himself reading from the greatest hits of the Climate Change Fear book.
Public health risks will become more pronounced with significant potential for loss of life and strain on health systems. That's what the report says. Now, that's what I'll point you to. Again, that's confronting. Cascading, compounding, concurrent. That's how the Australian Climate Service describes the impact of climate change on every community in our country. Cascading, it will get worse. One thing that is very clear from this climate assessment is that our whole country has a lot at stake. That every Australian, regardless of where they live, has a lot at stake.
Okay, so we're turning it up to 11. Why? Because apparently as early as this week, the government is going to announce what its plan is to deal with our emissions targets, not for net zero 2050, but to deal with the 2035. Now, these would all, of course, be officially signed off on if Australia was able to have a climate conference next year, and that next year the conference would be in Adelaide. So in the same way there was the Kyoto Protocols, and then there was the Paris Agreement. Well, the Adelaide standard would be potentially one where Australia and lots of other countries would start to set numbers about what they would do between now and 2035. Now, Australia has a piece of legislation that's gone through the Parliament. It is just as restrictive as the ban on any sort of nuclear energy happening in this country. And that piece of legislation says that we are going to cut 43% of 1% of the world's problems by 2030. The expectation is that the 2035 target, well, in part will be set by lefties inside the government who want it to be 75%, which is the same number that the Teals want, or the Greens, whose vote is necessary to get anything through the upper house, they want 100%. So essentially they want net zero, not by 2050, they want it put in place by 2035. This report, the emotional reportage where in none of the reporting is the asterisk, that all of the worst case scenarios happen if there is a 3-degree rise in temperature and if Australia and other countries do nothing. Well, the reality is I don't think anyone would think that Australia is doing nothing. The question, of course, is what does something mean? Now, the changes that have been made since this government came to power now 3 years ago, 2022, and massively reaffirmed in 2025. Well, we've moved from one energy system to another. The cost borne by you when it comes to things like power bills. But obviously, this was not enough pressure to piss enough people off. In fact, they were willing to pay the bill, so much so that the government was handsomely re-elected. It went from close to 1 or 2 seat majority. It blew out now to 94 seats in the parliament. This wasn't 3 years ago, it was May. As a result, we will destroy parts of the Australian bush because we must destroy the land in order to save the atmosphere. And if the doom, the gloom and the predictions of, if we don't do everything that I tell you we have to do, is what we have to do, we now can start to park, yet again, the conversation of the cost of transition. When Bill Shorten failed to be able to answer what the cost of transition was, he didn't win an election in 2019. When Anthony Albanese pretended that the cost of transition was a power bill that would go down by $275, yet it was never delivered, he won an election. The very targets that are about to be set now, that could well be from 43 to 55, 65, 75, Teal targets or above, well, all of that could have been discussed in the election that we had in May. But of course, no discussion. Instead, the mega majority that they currently have will essentially rubber stamp a number that no one was able to debate. But of course, none of that matters because just like we are dealing post-logic We are dealing here with people who believe that this is the holy cause of our lives. Why do I say that? Because he says this.
This report is a reminder, if we needed one ever, that the cost of inaction will always outweigh the cost of action.
Ding, 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 ding. No more 275. And how dare you ask about how much any of this is going to cost, because the cost of doing nothing is more than the cost of doing something. Now, here is the bit that everyone needs to understand, which is that does climate change exist? Obviously. You can't have 7 billion people on the planet and it not do something to the planet, right? The catastrophe that has just been presented, that of course will be used to give further scares to young people, creating climate anxiety up the yin-yang all the way from primary school all the way through to university. Well, the reality is that if all of that works and you say to Bowen and everyone else, you know what, go harder than has ever been gone before. In fact, forget 43% of 1% of the world's problem. Let's do 100% of 1% of the world's problem. That's the point. It's only 1% of the world's problem. You see, the Union of Concerned Scientists first put this together in 2020, updated it in 2023, and it's worth watching. And I've shown it to you many, many times before. So let's imagine that Australia, which is up in the top left-hand corner of the pie here, which is 1% of the world's problem. Now, we are not going to be able, even if we did everything Chris Bowen and this climate report wants, we can't stop what China is doing to the planet with its more than 1/3 of the global pollution. We cannot stop what the rest of the world, or the third world, is doing when it comes to pollution. We can't stop the United States and its 13%, India and its 7%, Russia and it's 5%, or as you think about it, like a climate clock, starting at midday, going to 1/4 going to 1/2, and going to 1/4. 3/4 of the climate clock is the problem. Oh, no, but 1% is somehow going to be the solution. This is what does my head in. Does every country need to do its bit? Absolutely. But does Australia need to disproportionately push power bills through the roof, certain industries to the ground, entire treescapes torn away on the presumption that if Australia does everything, then somehow it will outweigh 3/4 of the world not doing enough, or, in many cases, doing bugger all but creating a bigger problem? Which brings us to the central fantasy of the way Bowen talks about this issue. Even if we do everything that every greenie wants, we share the same atmosphere as every other country on the planet. Can you put that country thing back up? Because if China doesn't have to adhere to anything until 2060, and the third world it doesn't apply to, and the United States has pulled out of the conferences, and India and Russia, guess what? Even if we do everything and the billions and billions and billions of dollars that it costs the consumer or the taxpayer, our weather is still impacted by everything else in the globe. So yes, a great way to bring down your power bills, and I support the policy, is to put solar panels on your roof. To put a battery that means if you can take your house off the grid, then you are not going to have to get caught up in much of the shock that exists with the system going from the one that has previously worked for 50 years to the one that, fingers crossed, works for the next 30 years. But if anyone believes that doing that to your house is going to change the weather, well then, I can't help you. And in the same way that those people will be flaming me for being some sort of a denialist, I'm not a denialist about the obvious. 7 billion people on the planet, multiple industrial revolutions. Sure, something's happening to an ecosystem that would otherwise have no humans on it, okay? From tens of thousands of years ago, all right? I am aware of a problem, but to think Australia is the solution, and that if we all sing off the same song sheet, then magically the 3/4 of the problem won't end up affecting us, good luck. Airbus Albo's back up in the air again. Of course, this is summit season. which otherwise means the greatest leader Australia has ever had gets the chance to fly around and remind everyone of the very meetings that he couldn't go to last year. They weren't important enough to go to last year, but this year, not really important, I've got to go to all of them. Don't you love the difference between before an election and after an election? And of course, he's playing his Jedi mind trick where, as we showed you last week, he turns up to one of the meetings of the Pacific Islands with the wrong T-shirt on. Again, who cares? Who cares? Oh, but he was on the radio today saying, no, it doesn't matter. It didn't happen. Yeah, it did. The same guy that when he fell off a stage during the election campaign actually tried to tell us that he didn't fall off the stage during the election. Well, this sort of nonsense is now playing out in Papua New Guinea. Now, the Australian Prime Minister, wherever he travels, has often an announcement that comes with him. And he will say that every single dollar here is about helping our Pacific neighbours. It's part of being the big brother when the little brother is in trouble. Terribly sexist, isn't it? But still, it's also a way of keeping China at bay, even though China often has as much money, if not more, invested in many of these countries as we are trying to invest. But pay attention to a country that is $1 trillion in debt, that being Australia, that has budget deficits for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, according to the Treasury and its intergenerational report. I don't know. There's still money on the credit card for our mates in the Pacific.
$10 million to $15 million, $25 million, $25 million, $100 million, $12 billion in new funding.
And so on and so on. This is on top of $600 million, which the Australian taxpayer will do to establish a rugby league team in Papua New Guinea. Well, as Airbus elbow is up and in the air again, guess what? Australia is getting even tighter in its relationship, and rightly so. It's good to have a good security relationship with Papua New Guinea. But basically, the Australian Defence Force is merging with the Papua New Guinean Defence Force. Now, does this mean that people from Papua New Guinea can serve in the Australian Defence Force? Yes. Does this mean that people in the Australian Defence Force may well be deployed to Papua New Guinea? Probably. So the football team, climate change money, the Defence Force, in case of Solomon Islands, the Pacific Island Games and their elections, all paid for by the Australian taxpayer. Fine, okay, it's about being a good citizen. Well, then could somebody please tell the Prime Minister that there are suffering citizens in this country? Report today, Courier Mail. It shows about the number of kids in schools, Australian schools, public, Australian schools, that are currently malnourished. Queensland school children are the hungriest in the country, with an alarming new report revealing growing crisis in schools across the state. Shocking figures from Eat Up, a charity that provides free lunches to students across Australia to combat classroom hunger, show that demand has exploded over the past 12 months across regions including Brisbane, Caloundra and the Gold Coast. So, Prime Minister, as you go from Pacific Island to Pacific Island before you go to the United States, where we expect, yes, there will be that meeting with Donald Trump, where billions of dollars can be promised here or there or everywhere, is there any chance that the same largesse could be extended to supporting the kids of Australia who go hungry? Or the organisations like Food Bank that have told us that more than 3 million Australian households, not individuals, households, will run out of food by the end of this week. In fact, the Prime Minister will no doubt, in the next few days, promise money for others that is far greater than the money that he gives to the charities who help feed the poor here in Australia. And I'd love to think that the majority of Australians would agree with us that this is something that should happen. But how often did we talk about this for how many years in the lead up to an election where this bloke didn't just win, but he won handsomely, where he was apparently the solution to part of the cost of living problems that he either made worse or ignored as Prime Minister? Is it because there's no photo ops? There's no shirts to be worn, like when you are handing out money to Pacific Island leaders when it comes to poor kids in Queensland? Oh yeah, but we're the hard-hearted ones. Now, look, don't bet your house on it, but pretty obviously there is going to be a meeting sooner rather than later between Donald Trump as President of the United States and the Australian Prime Minister. Now, we all know a whole bunch of reasons why this has been put off and put off and put off and put off. But let me be really clear. This meeting is going to happen. It is going to happen at or around the United Nations General Assembly. Now, remember, this is also the place where Australia and many other countries are going to vote to recognise the state of Palestine, but it's an opportunity for the US president to bang out, 10 different leaders that he can have a chat to in and around New York. Why do I think that it's going to happen? Because, well, the meeting between the Vice President and the Defence Minister, our Deputy Prime Minister, this was part of the preamble. This is going to happen. The only question is whether he's going to be impressed enough with the defence money that we're going to put on the table. And, of course, is Kevin Rudd somehow going to find a way to put his own head inside the meeting? Who knows? We'll have to find out together. Now, as I like to tell you, while you are working very hard each and every day, there are plenty of people in and around Australian politics who remember their full-time pursuit is talking about themselves or making you look at them, because they are, of course, way more exciting. I'm talking about what did the politicians do on social media? Let's begin with clueless Claire O'Neill.
The PM goes to the Broncos. No,
he's Rabbitohs.
You'll have to delete this
So,
bit. You'll have
leave.
my job.
Did you hear that, PM? She thinks you go for the Broncos.
No, I'm... Oh, I can't believe you're looking at me. What an
I've got
endorsement.
sport. Who do you go for in the AFL?
I go for the Hawks. My only real engagement with sport. But yeah,
that's your only real engagement?
Yeah.
So no NRL either then?
Is NRL the Broncos?
Yes.
What about this Minister of the Crown?
This is Red Flag, Green Flag with Amanda.
Make it really care-related.
Medicare edition.
Sprained my ankle playing sport.
Green flag.
I burnt my hand making dinner.
Green flag.
I have some chest pain and I think it could be a heart attack.
Red flag.
I have a cut that's looking a little infected.
Green flag.
I broke my leg and I think I might need surgery.
Red flag.
And finally, the bloke who, of course, is simultaneously the Home Affairs Minister and the Arts Minister, because, they're the same thing.